Good evening. Welcome to Tishman Auditorium at the New School. Tonight's event is a very special annual event at Parsons at the School of Constructed Environments, where we have architecture, interior design, lighting design, and product design students working together in a collaborative environment. The event, Michael Khalil Endowment for Smart Design Memorial Fellowship Grant Awards and Fellow presentation, is just that, a memorial event for a very special faculty member who left us the resources to fund this amazing annual program that we have. I'd like to introduce myself very quickly. My name's Alvin Bruton. I'm faculty in architectural and interior design at the School of Constructed Environments. I have the privilege of being the committee co-chair for the Michael Khalil Committee. And that committee is responsible for reviewing the numerous grant applications that we get every year and trying the difficult decision of awarding the three. But I'd like to introduce a little bit about who Michael Khalil was and what the endowment is set up for. The Michael Khalil Endowment for Smart Design was established in 2001 in memory of designer Michael Khalil at the School of Constructed Environments. The mission of the endowment is twofold: to foster an understanding of the design intersections between nature and technology, and to support a heightened sense of responsibility for increasing the sustainability of built environments. Each year, the endowment awards 3 Memorial Fellowship Project grants and sponsors a visit lecture by an annual Kalil Fellow selected by an international community of scholars and practitioners working in the spirit of Michael Khalil. This evening, we are pleased to be hearing from the 2013 Fellow, David Orr. The fellowship grants are awarded to students and faculty at Parsons, the New School for Design, as well as to outside scholars and practitioners. Recipients of the grants use their award monies to support a project of courses or a course of study or travel that will both increase their understanding of the intersections between nature and technology, as well as make a contribution to environmental sustainability. So we'd like to award the 3 grants briefly here now before we get on to introducing David Orr and bringing him up for his presentation. So one of our awardees couldn't be here tonight because they're doing their midterm reviews where he's teaching. So he's going to go to the dinner later, but he can't be here to receive his award, but I'm going to present his project. The other 2 student awardees are here, so if they could come up and receive their letter from the dean, David Lewis, standing here behind me, after their project has been presented. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to present their projects as they've captioned their images for me, so pardon me if I misrepresent anything in your work. So the first grant I'll present is for the scholar practitioner. Vincent Appel is an architect in New York City. His project, called Coastal House Prototype, funds research into the development of new typologies in flood resilience for coastal housing. This is in direct response to Sandy. The project researches how best to rebuild in a best flood-resilient manner an existing 1950s-era Sears prefab bachelor's cottage destroyed by Hurricane Sandy's surge. It's going to research how to do so economically. The specific question the research addresses is, what do we do with the first 14 feet, most at risk of irreparable flood destruction? A variety of strategies will be investigated, including, obviously, prefabrication in response to the prefabricated nature of the existing wreck, airtight building envelopes, waterproof submergible construction methods, flood-resistant materials, landscaping, floatable building components, etc. The research will try to produce a typological prototype that is socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable, resilient in a manner that will provide ongoing benefits in perpetuity. So we award, in his absence, this $5,000 grant to Vincent Appel. The first student grant we'll award tonight is for Rebecca Rand, who's a Master of Architecture student. Her project, called Flush Design Dry, researches the potential for expanded use of non-water consuming toileting systems. The research challenges how Western culture places too high a value on the association of flush toilets with adequate sanitation. Non-flush systems are often interpreted as insufficient, despite their proven ability to effectively reduce waterborne disease and benefit the environment. This is a local urban problem, as demonstrated by this photograph of the underground spring inlet to the Canal Street sewer. With minor rainfall, as many of our students know, but to make it more widely understood, the commonality of this very serious problem, with minor rainfall, less than 1/20th of an inch, New York's combined sewer system, outdated, dumps 27 billion gallons of untreated sewage into our harbor every year. This is an example of a project that Rebecca will go travel to research its strategies. This is Simpark's Clean Live and Live Work facility in Vendover, Utah. The project incorporates composting toilets and wastewater recycling technology. In the US, non-flush toilet technologies exist, though they are mostly in private, remote, and off-grid sites like this one. This is a project in the Bronx Zoo. That's a working, semi-private restroom that incorporates composting toilets with which safely process waste material fertilizer for the gardens located outside. Rebecca questions, could this strategy work in an urban housing setting? This is a project, oh, I was off by a project there. The slides are being slow. Hold on. That's the Bronx Zoo. Oh, I don't have a photo. Oh, no, also here, also in this photograph, actually, is that this is the Portland Loo, which is a solar-powered freestanding kiosk toilet that offers a chance to study public restrooms at an urban scale on the street. How do material lighting and architectural choices shape perceptions of cleanliness, social equity, and security, and ultimately lead to use? So that's Rebecca's grant proposal in a nutshell, if she would come up and accept the award. Congratulations. Our second student grant award is for graduate student Jacinda Ross, who's a dual degree major in architecture and lighting design. Her project called Flexible Apertures researches window treatment's potential for environmental control and mediation. The window aperture, as Jacinda describes, is a crucial interface between a building's inhabitants and the forces acting on their exterior environments. Through the use of white wool in this photograph, greater flexibility in shaping not only one's light preferences, but also improving the quality of their air, acoustic, and thermal conditions, particularly in aging urban residences, is the goal of this research. This generic mock-up demonstrates how the structural integrity of wool allows it to support patterns of cuts and folds that carefully shape incoming light and views, using knowledge from architectural shading devices and applying it on a micro scale. Simultaneously, wool permanently purges the air of toxic VOCs, volatile organic compounds, being given off constantly by common household furniture and products, and also polluted air entering from the outside. Looking at surface-to-volume fabrication, what geometries can be created that block sleep-disrupting street lamp glare while allowing morning illumination, or redirect afternoon sun to keep rooms cool but illuminated? And this slide always takes a long time to load because the file's so big. But it's a good one. The research asks, can lines of tension connect through these geometries in intuitive ways to allow formal changes? Light could then be molded to support a symbiosis with the outside environment throughout diurnal and seasonal cycles. So if Jacinda would like to come up and receive her grant. So that was the award ceremony. David will introduce our guest.
Good evening. Many of you tonight in this audience were witness to the dramatic life-disrupting and civic-altering impact of Sandy. That in one 24-hour stretch reminded us all that, yes, indeed, New York City is located near water, if not under, has been built up extensively on its edges to serve the needs of international shipping, and that a substantial portion of the city, Zone A, as it were, exists only a few feet above what was then called normal sea level, a designation currently under reconsideration as global civilizations struggle to come to terms with the known and unknown implications of human-induced climate change. For those students, faculty, and staff at the New School, the immediate after effects of Sandy were clearly felt even in the middle of one of the most densely populated cities in the United States. Power went out, water didn't run, residence halls were shut, classes were canceled. But for many, a few weeks later, it was back to habits and residence and patterns, reviews and finals. Sandy, a memory of the recent past. For others, more substantially impacted, the work is still ongoing at the borders, edges, and boundaries of the city's negotiation with its water. David Orr, the 2013 Michael Kalil Fellow, has been asked to speak tonight in this post-Sandy urban educational context, which catches many of us between the desire, if not obligation, to implement change and the paralyzing impact of the enormity of the challenges ahead that too easily drifts us into a state of inertia. The question, in particular for this audience in this room, is the role of education and design in the face of climate change, global ecology, and the related questions of social justice. It is to this and other issues that our speaker, David Orr, has staked the work of his life, describing, animating, and enacting. David Orr is the Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Politics and Senior Advisor to the President of Oberlin College. He is the author of 8 books, including recent publications, Hope is an Imperative and Down to the Wire, Confronting Climate Change, and co-editor of at least 3 others. As the author of over 200 published essays, he is one of the most distinguished voices on environmental literacy in this country, if not globally. At Oberlin, he has been the driving force behind the creation of the Adam Joseph Lewis Center for Environmental Studies, designed in collaboration with William McDonough and partners, and is currently working to transform not just the campus, but the town of Oberlin through a commitment to revitalizing local agriculture, food supply, forestry, and eliminating carbon emissions to fundamentally design a holistic approach to living on this earth. He is the recipient of multiple honorary degrees and awards, including the Millennium Leadership Award from Global Green, the Bioneers Award, and the National Wildlife Federation Leadership Award. In the past 25 years, he has served as a board member or advisor to multiple foundations and on the boards of many organizations, including the Rocky Mountain Institute and the Adolf Leopold Foundation. Currently, he is trustee of the Bioneers Alliance for Sustainable Colorado and the World Watch Institute. Tonight, we're privileged to have David Orr as the Michael Kalil Fellow. David's work, in many ways, epitomizes the mission of the Michael Kalil Endowment for Smart Design, fostering an understanding of the intersection between nature and technology, and increasing the sustainability of our built and constructed environments. Would you join with me then in welcoming David Orr as the 2013 Michael Kalil.
I asked if the microphone, which I've got on my waist here, had a filter to filter out dumb and inane comments. And I was told, no, you're on your own. So here I am. It's really nice to be here, and these 2 glasses of water scare me with a computer. I'm going to put these down here. That is water, right? Not vodka. It's really nice to be here. And all of you in the design world are in the crossroads of solutions for climate change and social issues. And it's particularly apt and important to be here in this particular place for your long-term commitment to thinking about society and justice and those issues, and then marrying that into the built environment. That is an incredibly important junction, and it hasn't been made often enough. And so it's a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here, and in the spirit of Michael Khalil, I'm delighted to be here and look forward to conversations with you this evening and perhaps on into the future. The truth in advertising, I'm not a designer, I'm not an architect, but some of my best friends are. And I'm a political scientist by training. Write for Biology Journal and so forth. Just a bit of background over the last several years. In 2008, living in London, I wrote a book called Down to the Wire, Confronting Climate Collapse. And that was a 35,000-foot meditation on what it means for you and I to live in this particular era. This is like no other era. I mean, every era is different in some way. But this is, for us, this is the defining moment of Homo sapiens, our kind. And I'll explain a little bit more about why I say that and then how we respond to that fact. And then coming back to the States, I worked for a foundation on the side, and we put together what was called the President's Climate Action Plan. And for the 2008 election, it was for whoever was going to be president, Democrat, Republican, male, female, did not matter. But a group of us, about 250, got together and looked at the issue of climate change. We had several assumptions. One is that time is not our friend on this particular issue. This is a loaded gun. It has long-term implications. And because of the leads and lags in the climate system, it means we have to act well in advance of the proof, the final proof that this is a real, serious issue. So we got together around that assumption and one other. And that assumption was that climate change and energy policy were flip sides of the same coin. They were linchpin issues. If you get those issues right, you get lots of other things right. Balance of payments, pollution, security issues, domestic economy, and so forth. So the rest is kind of history. 2008, President Obama was elected. The issue slid down on his list of priorities, and so we still, to this day, do not have a de jure climate policy. The de facto policy is still pretty much pedal to the metal. I mean, it's not that grim. The president's done a lot of things below the radar screen, and federal purchasing has changed, and research and development has changed, and so forth. There's a lot of good things to report. What I want to talk about, the second half of this talk, is about what do I do where I am. And I live in a small town, 10,000 people, Rust Belt. And I'll explain a bit about what we're trying to do there. But the point is, for me personally, this is a very personal story, what do I do in the face of these other insurmountable or apparently insurmountable things? On the screen is a black swan, and this refers not to the movie, but to the book by Nicholas Taleb, the financial risk analyst. And the point of the book is that all swans are white until one's black, and that's an unpredictable event. That's a black swan event. It lies beyond our capacity to know exactly what it's all about. So what Taleb does in the book, most of our attention, remember your statistics, or my students refer to it as sadistics, most of our attention goes in the Gaussian curve to the big numbers. What Taleb was concerned about was the small or unknown numbers. And so the kind of events, the black swan event, is a kind of event that is either of low probability or unknown probability, but with large implications for the entire globe and long-term implications over many years. Black swan event. This bridge had been inspected, if I remember correctly, the month before. This is I-35 coming out of Minneapolis. It was safe until it wasn't. This was the tidal wave at Fukushima, or in eastern Japan, black swan event, and the convergence of a Richter 9 event, some awfully bad equipment made by General Electric Corporation, some bad planning, probably some political corruption, but the convergence of a number of things that caused a massive disaster. This was supposed to be the safest oil platform until it wasn't. This, of course, is the Macondo well, the BP spill. The black swan events aren't all technological or geological events. They're human events also. These are FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, numbers about food prices preceding the Arab Spring. And so as food prices went up, again because of multiple factors, some of which were caused by climate change, then this is what we got. And so black swan events can be social events as well. And then it can be also economic, and in some ways we've stacked the deck against ourselves. This was Time Magazine, 1999. This was the committee set aside to save the world. And they did a heck of a job. I don't like slides that have lots of words on them, but just notice this. The flaws in the economic system in which we live, they're design flaws. It has lots of different things that just aren't right, but not the least of which is that the more stuff we have, the happier we are. We all know that's not true, and the stuff that makes us happy are our friends and our work and poetry and baseball, and there are things where we come together, and beyond a certain fairly minimal amount of money, happiness kind of doesn't budge. We all know that. That's just part of what we are. And then here's the one other point I think in the slide is worth noting. The laws of economics begin, we're told, with Adam Smith. The Wealth of Nations was published in 1776, but the laws of the biosphere have been evolving for about 3.8 billion years, and trying to calibrate those two has been awfully hard to do, and we're not very good at that. And so we have an economic system that is chewing up the planet at an awesome rate. The planet doesn't work by the rules of the economy. And then there's this. I wish Gary Larson would go back to cartooning. You all don't find that funny. I find that funnier than you do, I guess. Anyway, one of the objects that's been coming closer in the mirror is this one. It's called the Keeling Curve. If you ask about curves, if you ask the audiences recognize the McDonald's arches, that curve, well, yeah, they do. And the Coca-Cola banner, yeah, they do. And the Nike swoosh, and yeah, everybody knows that. But the Keeling Curve is the one that will kill us. And I said that once with a slide with those 4 curves on it. I said only one of those will kill you, and somebody in the audience yelled out, no, 3 of them will kill you. So this is the Keeling Curve, and this, of course, you all know this, but this is the breathing in and out of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and NOAA just announced we're at about 394 parts per million, the second highest rate this last year in 2012, the accumulation of carbon. This is named after David Keeling, who went to Mauna Loa down here in 1958, and the carbon content of the atmosphere, or CO2 content, was 315 parts per million. We're now at 394. Now the problem with that is this. The effects that we see, whether if you can say that climate change amplified Sandy to a superstorm, you have to remember that that was a result of what came out of our smokestacks and tailpipes 30 years ago. It has nothing to do with 390 some parts per million. So what we don't know is what 394 parts per million will cause. We can suspect it's going to be awfully bad. But the climate system has this roughly 30-year lag between what we do and the effects that we see because of what we did. You follow what I'm saying? It makes the politics of this really difficult. It makes it very iffy, and it gives a wedge for people who want to deny this or simply evade the reality of it. But this is one of the big problems. This, of course, is Sandy, and I was saying to somebody earlier, I live right about in here. We had an evening of winds that were 60 miles plus all night long, and we were a good many miles from New York. And you've all seen curves like this. And the problem we have with these is that they're still kind of distant, but somewhere here, as CO2 bumps up here, things come undone. There was a raft of reports that came out in the late 2012 from the World Bank, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences, the European Union, and you can go on. But the stack on my desk was about a foot high. And all of them were saying we have blown past, we will blow past a 2 degrees centigrade warming. And 4 degrees centigrade was what the World Bank said we're on track for 4 degrees centigrade, and some people put it at 6 degrees. Now, the problem with some of this is this. When we asked the scientists that were working, including John Holdren, who were working with us on the Climate Action Plan in 2008, what was the point beyond which we should not go? Everybody said 2 degrees centigrade warming. And we are now on a course, business as usual, continuing. We are going to blow past 2 degrees centigrade warming. I'm going to come back to this in just a few moments. But I want to get at another point here, and it's simply this, that and I've said this to audiences all over the country, but if I pull out, reach down here and I pull out an Uzi or what we call a Bushmaster 232 or whatever these lethal weapons are, I get your attention in a way that that slide doesn't get it. Because we're wired by evolution to respond to direct physical threats. That is one of the toughest things we have to deal with in communicating this issue. You look at that and you're wired to say, well, if you just made the color a little bit lighter blue, and if that yellow line had been orange maybe or whatever. Do you follow what I'm saying? So as long as the threat is immediate and direct and it is dependably loathsome, then we're okay. We can respond to that. But we don't respond to this, especially when the time lag is 30 years or 50 years or 100 years or whatever. And so we got a problem with that. And here's another problem. This is David Archer, and David Archer is a geophysicist at the University of Chicago. He started his book called The Long Thaw with these words: the climatic impacts of releasing fossil fuel CO2 to the atmosphere will last longer than Stonehenge, longer than time capsules, longer than nuclear waste, far longer than the age of human civilization so far. Each ton of coal that we burn leaves CO2 gas in the atmosphere. The CO2 coming from a quarter of that ton will still be affecting the climate 1,000 years from now. Now you take a deep breath, and it raises two issues. One is, how do we think about those kinds of things? We don't have institutions, other than say maybe the Catholic Church or the Chinese Empire, that have that kind of longevity. So how do we think about that? And the other is cultural. We as Americans are problem solvers. We're good at that. We've developed a technological aptitude that is quite remarkable. So you got a broken carburetor on a Chevy pickup truck, that's fixable. Carbon in the atmosphere is not fixable by any means known to us now. And if you think about this, any way that carbon would be removed from the atmosphere would have to itself be carbon neutral. It would have to remove roughly 9 billion tons of carbon per year simply to stay level at 394 parts per million. It would have to do it at a speed, it would have to be deployed at a speed that really impacts the problem and at a price we could afford. And we can't even agree to energy efficiency improvements at the national scale, let alone removing carbon. You follow what I'm saying? So this puts us in a bind, and it raises an issue of how do we communicate this issue? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know. When we did the Climate Action Plan, we asked a number of speechwriters and publicity companies and communications experts how best to communicate this kind of thing. And we had wanted President Obama to give a speech, roughly the climate equivalent of the Day of Infamy speech that Franklin Roosevelt gave right after Pearl Harbor. That, of course, didn't happen at that point. It may still happen, but it didn't happen then. But it's an awfully tough issue. And you think about Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. Remember that movie on the stage? Nicholson is a Marine Corps commandant. You all remember the movie, right? Of course you do. So Nicholson's on the stage, and Tom Cruise, the young JAG attorney, is trying to get him to tell the truth, and he says, I just want the truth from you. And Nicholson, remember how he spit out those words, you can't handle the truth. That's the best I can do. So there's a viewpoint. T.S. Eliot said much of the same thing, that humankind can't bear much reality. But on the other hand, there's Winston Churchill, the classic case. Churchill bombs falling on London in 1940. Churchill doesn't get on BBC and go to the British public and say, you know, this is a wonderful opportunity to finally build the city that Christopher Wren wanted us to build back in the 17th century. No, what he said was, I had nothing to offer but blood and toil and tears and sweat. So how do we communicate this? And I don't know. People need to be hopeful, but within the error bars of what we believe to be the truth scientifically. What is the most hopeful view we can have? Now, I'm saying this as an educator, and I tend to believe, like most of you probably believe, that we're visual creatures, and we're creatures that when our hands and our hearts are engaged in something, we get a lot better than when it's something merely an abstraction. So I want to get back to that point. So anyway, this is back to the Black Swan event. We're now loading the dice, as James Hansen puts it, with now, instead of one face of the die coming up disaster, we now have maybe two faces of it. And so when Taleb concluded the paperback version, what he did was to talk about designing a society that was robust to error, and robust to malice, and robust to things like climate destabilization. And that gets us into thinking about how do systems work? And these are nonlinear systems. The climate system certainly is nonlinear. Beyond some point, change can get out of control. There are leads and lags. There are leverage points and tipping points and surprise and synergy and creativity. So this is not the linear system we've been more or less educated to believe exists in the world. And if I render this a design problem, which I think is the most constructive way to think about it, then it falls into your bailiwick as designers. How do we begin to design a world that is robust to error? And so if you think of all the design challenges in front of us, greenhouse gas is certainly being part of that. But think about the second item on this list, security for everyone. We spend in the United States about $15,000, maybe $16,000 every second of every day on something we call security. That's for weapons and fighting wars and so forth. If we had that money, and if you could design, let's say, as designers, a system that would make people feel secure, and that's capital S, not small s, not just from marauding armies crossing the borders, the Canadians coming down and seizing Buffalo, New York or something. But if you could design a security system, what would it look like? And what would the biophysical reality be like? What would the buildings be like? And the cities be like? And so forth. But go down that list. These are all design issues. And then the last item here, solving any one of those helps to solve all the rest. So how do we design a world of the virtuous circle where good things begin to propagate? And then in thinking about this, and you all are at the forefront of this, and this is one of the great things that goes on here. You take it for granted because it's just your daily life. But there is a design revolution going on that most people outside don't know much about. It's been kind of a subtext. You see articles in a newspaper or magazines or online sometimes. But it's never told as a single story. There is an amazing revolution happening in human capabilities and how we make the human presence on the planet in a way that is ecologically sound and socially fair and works over the long time. So these are just some of the design categories, but you take them all together and there is a major design revolution going on. And it has some characteristics. When we get the design right, the solution doesn't cause problems elsewhere. It solves, in Wendell Berry's felicitous phrase, it solves for pattern. In other words, no design should stand as an isolated solution to an isolated problem. And then it is technically feasible. It's got to be something that we can actually do. And then it's competitive. And one of the ways to think about competition is simply the amount of carbon dioxide per dollar spent on a project. We've got to begin to aim to carbon neutral or even carbon positive kinds of things. And then it's got to be deployable rather quickly. As you know from Sandy here in New York, we can't wait another 10 or 20 years to study most of these issues. And then it's these words resilience, which has come into popular use in the last few years. It means the capacity to absorb change from outside and still retain your basic vital functions. Or as a Marine Corps friend of mine puts it, take a gut punch and come back swinging. And as I reminded him, he's a Marine, so that refers to a barroom brawl. But maybe the better course of action is not to get into the brawl in the first place. But that was wasted on him. That's a joke, too. So you've been involved in the making of the Hanover Principles. This is one approach to design. This reflects the brilliant work of Bill McDonough and his colleagues and Kevin and so forth here. And so this is one way to think about this, and this is highly informative for us in the making of the Lewis Center, which I'll show in just a few moments. Janine Benya's work in biomimicry, and Janine, in the little book on the left-hand side of the slide, biomimicry, it's how do we begin to use natural systems as design templates. And her remark that spiders make silk stronger than steel, tougher than Kevlar, from digested flies at room temperature without oil, sulfuric acid, high pressure, without the heat, beat, treat kind of approach by which we make most things. So this is the electron microscope magnification of a spider's underside, the extruder. That's making taking those dead flies in sunshine and making silk 5 times stronger than steel. And you think about this, made at or near the body. It is biodegradable, no sulfuric acid, no fossil fuels. That's biomimicry. Can we begin to replicate that through the way we make lots of other things? And Janine's work has been, over the last 10 or 15 years, like Bill McDonough's work, it's been fabulous. Termite mounds. often used as an example of ways in which nature actually makes things without fossil fuels, and even in this case, engineers and architects. But termites figured out a long time ago, apparently without architects and engineers, how to maintain constant temperatures in termite mounds, and also draw up water from many feet below, 50 or 60 feet below the termite mound from the nearest aquifer. Nature is a catalog of design solutions. If you've read Darcy Thompson, probably the most famous biologist most people have never heard of, but form and shape in the world. And these weren't made because they were necessarily pretty as they evolved by various organisms. They were made because they were functional and effective. And you think of, in Bill McDonough's phrase, designing buildings like trees and what trees do, and can we begin to emulate this? So we come in, and this is, by the way, a wasp nest that I got to know rather intimately in my backyard. Several of the wasps and I merged, actually, for a time. But the world of natural forms and shapes, nature has been at this, again, 3.8 billion years of design experience. And there's a different mentality. If you look at biology and ecology, and I don't want to read the slide here, but if you put biology and engineering side by side, begin to think about different design strategies. And again, just to focus on maybe the last one here, with biology or ecology, it's capable of growth and repair. With engineering, it's built-in obsolescence. And so the part of the design challenge before us is how do we make things in the built environment and the products that we make in ways that begin to mimic the biological world and the ecological processes. And one key to that is how we use the periodic table and the ingredients of life and materiality around us. We've virtually taken the entire periodic table and strewn it around the planet. And that's why if you're under roughly 30, if we do a bioassay of your fatty tissues and bloodstream, you've got 220 or 230 organochlorine compounds in your body that don't belong there. And we begin to see all kinds of other effects. The elements necessary for life, however, are very few. And those necessary for most of the life, the global commons, 96% of the things in the global commons consist mostly of 4 different ingredients. So moving over to architecture. The most famous book most architects have never read, of course, is Vitruvius. And Vitruvius talked about the functions of architecture had to do with firmness, commodity, and delight. And in our age, because of the challenge of sustainability, we had another one called harmony or sustainability. And then that requires us as designers, or you as designers, to think about the energy systems and all the implications of that: water, materials, ecology, and place and community. It's a much bigger design challenge, although Vitruvius, in fact, was pretty good about thinking about the larger fabric of design. But if you take the last part, then there's a distinction being made between form making, and this is an old debate in architecture. Many of you have been involved in this for lots of years. Form making, which is the style part of architecture, and then place making. And of course, these are not antithetical. If we get it right, form making and place making become intertwined. The places that we make are beautiful, but they also are made in a way that doesn't destroy other people's places. So this is Wendell Berry's version of this, asking 3 very simple questions. What's here? And what will nature let us get away with in a particular place or permit us to do? And then what will nature help us do here? And those are pretty good standards for thinking about design. So design is, and this is telling you nothing you don't know. Design goes beyond simply the making of things and human capabilities to understanding that design is about making things that fit in a particular ecological, cultural, and now temporal context. How do we design so well that David Archer's 1,000-year horizon is acknowledged and we take that into effect? How do we design for that kind of long term? The upshot, I think, before moving on to specifics, the upshot is this, that in designing this, and this is the way you all have designed buildings for a long time, you don't optimize. If you're designing ecologically, we don't optimize systems or components, but rather the entire system. The idea of understanding end use, which is an old theme that Amory Lovins has been hammering at us since 1974, 1975, comes from understanding the way physics works. And then there's a better economics in design. How do we design so well that we're designing for the long-term implications and the economics and the way we understand the flows of money around buildings and the built environment are charted or measured by what they do over the long haul. And then local solutions first. And this word again, resilience, has come up in lots of security thinking about from the military establishment and people who worry about how secure we are. So how do you build a resilient culture, one that can take a gut punch and come back swinging? And then conservation, conservation equals conservative, and that's something that's been lost in the contemporary political dialogue. And then finally, as all of you know here, and the legacy of the new school has been around social justice and issues of decency, human dignity, and fairness. And so the upshot is designing has become a much more complicated thing now, or better said, we now understand that design, capital D, not small d, is about how we calibrate all the things that we do and all the things that we need, how we provision ourselves with food, energy, water, materials, healthcare, livelihood, and do that in a way that's just and fair over the long haul with the way the world works over here as a physical system. Then using that information to then inform what we do and how we begin to, how our wants and needs and so forth are expressed in the world. One just note, because one of my heroes was Samuel Mockbee, who passed away a dozen years or so ago. Samuel Mockbee, of course, was the founder of the Rural Studio, and he was doing in rural Alabama what many of you are now doing in New York City, but taking design, making design, so it's not all about high-end buildings for wealthy customers, but it was also about how do you make things? How do you take this design revolution to the poorest around us? So Mockbee's work was in the Rural Studios worked in Hale County, Alabama, and Hale County, Alabama was famous for the pictures that were taken there years back in the 1930s in the middle of the worst economy we had known up to that point. This is my little town of Oberlin, and we are, I'll show you a map in just a moment. I said, kind of joking, 2 years ago when I first showed this slide, that the way you get pictures like this was to take a first-year student and strap him to a helium-filled balloon and give him a camera with electronic download. And I said, I was just joking. I said, you know, Bob's a nice kid. We miss him. I said he didn't transfer from Oberlin. He just kind of drifted away. And a woman came up afterwards and she thought I was serious. And she said, you know, you really shouldn't treat your students like that. So this was made by an electronic camera with a helium-filled balloon. Bob was on the ground. Anyway. We're a small town, roughly 10,000 people, 28% below the poverty level, so we're Rust Belt. We were founded around abolition. Oberlin was the first college to accept African Americans and women in the 1930s, and so, pardon, 1830s. So that's part of our legacy. We are Rust Belt. You're going to see two versions of this slide. This is Detroit, Toledo, Oberlin, Cleveland, Ohio. Youngstown is over here, another hour or so drive. So we're dead center of the U.S. Rust Belt. We're a typical small town. The Apollo Theater now was bought by the college, and this is directly across from the hotel that drawings of which you'll see in just a moment. This theater has been rehabbed as a cinematography program. It's on the historic sites around the state of Ohio. This is the Lewis Center, and there's a wee bit of a story that should be told about this. This goes back, this was a building that we did in 1995 to the year 2000. And it was for the environmental studies program. The college said you can do a building like this, but you'll have to raise all the money for it. And you can't go to any donor otherwise likely to give to the college. And you've heard that story before, maybe. So I used to joke that left me the Columbia drug cartel until somebody from Columbia came up and took exception, so I don't say that anymore. What we did on this building, since it was a building that we could control because we were raising the money for it, what we did was to make this an educational project. So we opened the door to anybody who wanted to be involved in this. And we had 13 design charrettes in the fall of 1995. We had about 250 students and townspeople come in. It was really interesting because most people, as you know, are not much involved in the built environment. That happens because of developers and builders and bankers, but not people out on Main Street. So the built environment is just something that happens to people, and we don't learn much from it. Well, actually, we learn that we're not party to that. The democracy stops when building begins. So the first charrette was kind of tough. It was kind of awkward. Nobody knew quite what to say. And then as the conversation began to flow, a good many things happened. Anger came out for some people who had been suffered because of the way building and development occurred. And then excitement came out. And what do we want to build? And what do we want to express about ourselves in the educational process by the way we build this building? And the standard for the building was, in McDonough's words, drinking water in, drinking water out. And there's several ways you can do that. One is to put the toilets in another building. And we did consider that. Students wanted a building that was powered by sunshine. And we have about as many sunny days as the city of Seattle. So it's kind of it's a little tougher challenge for us, although we're sunnier than most all of Germany. But what began to emerge was a dialogue about a building that we now describe as a platinum scale building, or platinum level building by USGBC standards. But this was 1995 and 1996. But above all else, what we wanted was a building that was educational. And we wanted a structure that, to paraphrase some of the design conversation, caused no ugliness, human or ecological, someplace else or at some later time. And when you think about that standard, then you have to go upstream to wells, mines, and forests and the manufacturing places where material flow begins. And if you compromise human dignity or ecological functions upstream, you can't say that the building, whatever it looks like, is beautiful. And the same thing downstream. If it's contributed to toxification of the planet or global warming or acidification of oceans or whatever else, you can't say to that extent that that building is beautiful. Do you follow what I'm saying? That's a macroscopic standard for development. But buildings are just buildings. They will always cause damage. But the one thing I wanted as a faculty member, I wanted this particular project to change the way people thought. Buildings are just buildings. But what we did in this was a little 13,700 square foot building was to give an example of how we can pull the world back together again. My students, all 18 to 22 years of age, a few older than that, have seen a good bit of their lives come undone. We live at a time when all the trends are up like this or down like that, and they come out of broken homes, there's violence rampant, and they look at the world and it's kind of, beam me out of here, Scotty, I don't fit on this planet. So how do we begin to create hope? And so this building became, for me, a kind of curriculum and applied hope. How do we begin to use the built environment to create the competence necessary to remake the planet and turn those nasty trends around that you saw in the first part of this talk? This is one of the things that came out of it. In the design charrette, the idea came about that we wanted the building to be transparent to data. So how the building actually worked was out on the web. Anybody in real time could see this. From 1996 until roughly 2001 or 2002, the technology changed pretty dramatically. We ran all kind of wires over the building with 160 data monitors or data sensors gathering data at regular intervals. Now you do it all wireless, and the technology's changed very dramatically. And so the building now is wired up. You can go online and you can follow the building and see what it's actually doing. Last year we generated 150-some% of the energy consumed in the building on site with solar energy. We've now taken this technology and we've wired up the entire campus. So there are dashboards on all the buildings on the campus. So you can go online and you can track any building on the campus or the totality of all the buildings. Our next step is to do this for the entire community of Oberlin. So there'll be a community dashboard. And we're studying human psychology about this. How do people perceive that screen? And what on the screen makes them respond to it? It turns out Oberlin has a town square, you'll see in just a minute. And there's a population of albino squirrels that live on the town square. And so in studying this, we had several psychologists work with us, and it turns out that to get the maximum response from people, if you had this little albino squirrel show up there in cartoon figure, when the squirrel was smiling, things were good. When the squirrel was sad, things were bad. And that seemed to resonate with people. But it's interesting because several things happen here. This is about how we manage the building. And so you need quick feedback. We all know that in different kinds of ways. You also need feedback that is connecting to the larger world. Can you see this building in a larger context? It's energy consumption. Can you connect energy consumption of this building or any building with global climate change? Well, yeah, you can now. The technology exists to begin to give us that kind of quick feedback. And then can you do it in a way that gets a positive emotional response? And so this technology, this was done by 3 students that were in that class back in 2001. They left Oberlin, started a little company called Lucid Designs, which is now one of the premier high-performance building monitoring companies. They're located in California. This is the back of the building. And this is part of a farm. You better take that call. This is part of a small rural farm here. So this is an orchard, gardens over here, and geothermal well field over here. But what we wanted to do in this, and this again is an 1.25 acre site. When Thoreau went to Walden, he said, I went to Walden to drive some of the problems of living into a corner where I could study them. And the issue here was to do the same thing in terms of sustainability. I don't know what you do with climate change, robotic impoverishment, or food and water crises and so forth. But what I do know is if you downscale it to the point where somebody can get their mind around it, then you can make it an educational project. And the scale is right for people to understand at this point. And then can you scale this up to the level of a city, which is now a challenge I'll get to in just a moment. This is Bill McKibben during Earth Day a year and a half ago or so. We were right in the middle of a 6-inch rain outside that descended on the campus right as Bill came in to talk. What Bill could not see here, I was taking a picture upstairs looking down into the atrium. This is Bill right here. There were some Oberlin students frolicking naked out there in the water, which they will do from time to time. That doesn't happen here, I know, but it does out in the wilds of Ohio from time to time. Now, looking down on the site, this is our 1.25 acre site. This is the living machine. This is the wastewater processing system. This is one PV array. This is a second. These two provide, last 12 months, I mentioned over 150% of the energy necessary for the building. But this is effectively our sustainability laboratory. Geothermal well field is up here. We took that model. And the question is, can you take that model of a building? If you ask, can you do a building, a great building? Well, you're doing one here. You've done several here. All of you are involved in one way or another with lots of other building projects. So if you ask, can you do a building powered by sunshine and efficiency? The answer is yes. We've been there. We've done that. The question for us is, can you begin to scale this up beyond the neighborhood development to a city of 10,000 and the surrounding area around it? Can you make a city that is carbon neutral? So we organized the Overland Project, and these are the goals for the project. The driver for this, we're again, poverty level of 28%. We've got to have an economic driver. We have to think hard about how to design an economy that really works. So that's the Green Art District. You'll see a little bit more about that in just a second. We want to take this 13-acre block, which the college owns, right in the middle of the downtown, and make that an economic driver, but do that block in a way that's powered by sunshine. It meets all the criteria for the Platinum Neighborhood Development Standard and then beyond, perhaps Living Building Challenge and so forth. Our second goal is to get the city and the college to carbon neutrality or carbon positivity, an awful way to say that word, but we're one of the 18 Clinton Climate Initiative sites. We've been rolled into the C40 cities that you all know a great deal about here. But we're obviously the small kid on the block. This year, by the end of the year, our electric supply in Oberlin will be roughly 90 to 95% carbon neutral. Once we got into this, we found it was a lot easier to begin to do this than it had been thought beforehand. We want to get to 70% of our food grown locally. Ohio was once a farm state with about 250,000 farms. We're now down to maybe 65,000, most all of which are in the corn and soybean business. And then we want to do this the way we did the Lewis Center. So we put together a consortium of the public schools, the college, a VOTEC school, and a 2-year college. And the question is, what do you young people need to know? What are the analytic skills and abilities that need to be part of your repertoire as you make your life, as you write your autobiography on the topography of this particular age? And then we're trying to figure out how we take this model and go viral. Call it full spectrum sustainability. So it looks something like this. We've organized the community around these 7 teams plus 2 more. And so we've gone out into the community and we've organized people around food and economy and law and policy issues and so forth. So we've engaged, we have about 350 people in the town of 10,000 that work with us every day on some aspect of this. Now, you think about this. The phrase full spectrum sustainability is just a fancy way to say you're going to have lunch with lots of different people. what this means for us is seeing Oberlin as a system. And if you've been around the environmental movement for any length of time, and most anything else, we do things in fragments. We went after renewable energy and sustainable agriculture and green building and green education and so forth, but we never did it as part of a system in which those parts reinforce the larger whole. Do you follow what I'm saying? Systems thinking. And it's a lot easier to describe it than to say exactly how that's working. This is a summary of an article written by Donella Meadows. And I'm not going to go through this, but we passed the article out that she wrote back in the late 1990s. She died in, I think, 2001. And she's asking, where do you intervene in a system in order to change the system? And so she ranked these in inverse order. The least effective things are the things that we typically talk about: subsidies, codes, standard taxes, laws, and so forth. The most effective things are down here, where you're beginning to shift the way people think about the system. And so we passed this out, and you can quarrel with the way she's ordered this. But the point for our community was, how do we think about changing a system? All of you are going to live, and all of you do live, in systems and organizations and corporations and maybe foundations or universities and colleges and so forth. And they're all big, clumsy things that are very difficult to change. Where do you intervene in them? How do you change that reality? So the point was not to get the right answer, but to get people thinking about, how do you spend your energy to shift this super tanker, or in our case, a small boat, with minimum energy? Where are the trim tab factors where small changes give you big effects over here? As we got into this, we did a kind of a community asset map. And for us in Oberlin College, it's kind of an interesting asset map. 28% poverty level, dead center of the Rust Belt. But our assets include a great conservatory of music that ranks up with Juilliard and Eastman and U.S. music circles. A performing arts center, which is a brilliant asset in the college and puts on amazing plays with students and actors locally. An art museum. This is a Cass Gilbert building. Cass Gilbert did the Flatiron building here, and the Woolworth building, and the U.S. Supreme Court. This is a 1917 Cass Gilbert building, but that art museum is ranked behind only those at Harvard and Yale in academic art circles. And then down here, a science program. This is not a particularly good building, but a science program that turns out more young people that go on for PhDs in the sciences than in a small liberal arts college in the country. So the point of the slide is this. As we began to think about our assets, a good bit of what we do in this movement and talking about climate change is simply boring. And my wife tells me I'm boring sometimes, but what does she know? It's 4 years of marriage. I'll say more about that in Q&A if you want to hear. But we talk about parts per million, and we talk about policy stuff, and that hits one side of the mind. And as academics, we think we live in that side of the mind. But think about a conversation about sustainability that includes art and music and poetry, and oh, by the way, the food is grown locally. Think about a much denser, more lively conversation that pulls together all facets of the human personality. So that's part of what we wanted to do. Now, this is Tappan Square, named after the Tappan brothers, New York merchants back in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, who were abolitionists and helped fund this little college out in the howling wilderness of Ohio. This is the Green Arts Block. This is 13 acres. The college owns both of these blocks. This is the Allen Art Museum you just saw. This is Hall Auditorium you just saw. This is one of the worst hotels ever built. And so this is the driver, this block. What happens in the block is the economic driver for us. We needed something to help pick the town up. Again, this town with 28% poverty level. How do we begin to restart the economy, but in this time do it sustainably and powered by sunshine? So these are the components that are going into the block. There'll be some housing that will be planned. That's not part of this presentation. Some businesses. There'll be a conference center you'll see in just a moment. There's talk about having an ecological design center that would be a little bit like Prince Charles Trust for the Built Environment in London. But those are the components. And then there's this little fact going back to the first part of the talk. Now you have to design differently. If we had been designing this in 1950, it would have been one kind of design. But now the climate stability that we could have assumed wrongly in 1950, we now know is not nearly as stable as we had once hoped. And so what we now design for has to accommodate stronger winds and bigger storms and all of these kinds of things. It's a different process. And how do we design for the long term, knowing that that long term will see steadily changing climatic systems? This is the Oberlin Inn. It was built to the exacting design and comfort standards of 1955 motor inns. And the plan presently is that that entire structure comes down. This is the whole block. Tappan Square is here. This is the Alvin Art Museum, Hall Auditorium here. Everything in orange is yet to be done or is yet to be built. And also including the hotel and conference center here. These two are historic houses and they would stay. So the issue for us is how do you begin to take the assets of a small, underfunded college relative to its mission and do a platinum plus solar-powered zero discharge hotel that draws on the design template of the Lewis Center. And it isn't a matter of build it and they will come. People already do come to Oberlin, but they've got no good place to stay. So how do we make hospitality, in this case, given our circumstances, the driver for a major asset? These are some of the schematic drawings. This side is a conference center with college offices here. The hotel is here, commercial space here. But as you stand on the corner, roughly where I am, more or less in relationship to this, you're looking through a 3-story atrium. That is the western view, the conference center, again, on the top. And then this is college offices here. Interior courtyard. Again, an aerial view of the development here as it comes online. The conference facility, this parking lot will be covered with a photovoltaic array. Interior schematic of what it might look like. And then in designing this, and all of you are much better at this than I am, but how do you design so you integrate all the systems? So a good bit of the design conversation is about understanding how you can take every BTU as it cascades through the system and wring all the value and all the work out of that. The same with energy efficiency and water efficiency. The plan right now is to make this a zero discharge facility. So again, McDonough's words, drinking water in, drinking water out. This is a project immediately across the street that's now completed. It was still under construction here when I took this picture, but the Green Arts District is on the right-hand side. This was a 3-building complex. The third building is behind, you can't see it, done by 3 former students that stayed in town, and this is LEED Gold at the neighborhood development level. They stayed in town, raised $17 million. They now are working on a project in Cleveland, in the Tremont part of Cleveland. This is Sherrod Brown, and I put this in here for 2 reasons. One is that Sherrod asked me just after I took this picture, he turned to me and said, "Where did you get this PV array?" And I said, well, the choices when we bought that were to buy from Germany or Japan. We couldn't buy that in Ohio. And the irony was not lost on him that a good bit of the technology was developed, the PV technology was developed 24 miles away at the NASA Glenn Space Center at the Cleveland Airport. And 50 miles to the west was First Solar, which was at that time the largest solar manufacturer, but they'd committed all their production then to Germany that had a feed-in tariff. The point here is that policy matters. And right now, all of us in the design field, no matter where you are in the design field, the policy has not been calibrated to do what we need to do to begin to make this shift towards sustainability and resilience. This is a 3 megawatt output PV array that we installed this last summer. This is one of the first of the 25 or 30 farms that we want to build around the city to help reach that 70% food self-sufficiency target. And I'm going to skip over this. These are things that everything in red is yet to be done, everything in black has been done. The public school here is going to be designed, that'll be a $30 or $40 million project, roughly the way we did the Lewis Center to make it educational. Now, I want to close out with a few thoughts here. One is thinking about design. One of the things that impressed me in working with architects and engineers and designers and material people and water people is virtually everything that you do is educational. And that's no surprise to anybody in this room. But design is a form of crystallized pedagogy. By the way we design, you let people know they're part of or a part from natural systems. And you can use design to inform or to just keep people in the dark about where materials and energy come from. On our campus, everything on the left-hand side here in white is part of the curriculum that can be embedded in the larger discussion as we remake this little city called Oberlin. But I can think of almost no discipline or department or research endeavor that should be left out of this. And then these are the things we've done to date. We've spent roughly, this figure should be bumped up to about 60 million, but we've spent the last 3 years moving this along. The hotel will be another 30 million, so we'll be roughly $100 million into this. Now, that's gotten me into a kind of interesting dialogue about money. For every dollar of philanthropy, we've pulled in $6 of private investment. And so when you design things, we now have to understand how we design economies that support the kind of output that we want to get. What do those economies look like, and how do we begin to take money, investment dollars, and harness that to this larger goal of sustainability? These are the goals for the next year or two. We're close. We're hoping to break ground on the Gateway building, the hotel complex this summer. Now, a couple of final thoughts. If you take a beam of light and you refract it through a crystal, it breaks it into different bandwidths and so forth. It depends on where you are as to what this is. If you're a student, 18 years old, and you come to Oberlin, a little town out 35 miles west of Cleveland, it's a cool downtown. Instead of a downtown that folds up at 9 o'clock at night, it's a downtown with lots of activity 24/7 because you've attracted people back to the town. If you're a faculty member, it's better facilities for conferences and to host gatherings and have real hospitality. If you're a local business person, it's more business. We think we can triple the volume of business in a small downtown, again, that has struggles with poverty and that Rust Belt phenomena. If you're Sherrod Brown in the U.S. Senate, it's a model of economic renewal in the Rust Belt. And there's been a lot of conversation about how we do that in the Rust Belt. And for us, we have to rethink what development is. It's no longer going to be around steel and the making of metal products, heat, beat, treat kind of things. It's now got to be a smarter economy. And it's got to be calibrated to the way the natural systems work as a physical system. For Bill Clinton, it's climate action. We'll be carbon neutral long before most any other of the large enterprises can get there. For me, it's an educational laboratory, beginning to mix students with some of the best designers and people who know how to make things and change the world. So students leave with a Rolodex of names and possibilities, but begin to see the world is still rich in possibilities. We're not fated to end with the heat death of the planet and so forth. For the design team, it's the first model, I think, of integrated design that includes agriculture and policy and finance and education, plus architecture and urban renewal. And then the last item here, 3 years ago, I got introduced to a dialogue going on very robustly in the Pentagon about national security. Sustainability is now part of the national security dialogue, and for obvious reasons. We understand now that the electric grid is going to go down at some point. In the 2007 and virtually every national security estimate since, the report is the electric grid is incredibly vulnerable, as are bridges and lots of our infrastructure. We know they're being hacked, and in the Pentagon view, it's not whether these things go down, it's when they go down and how long they stay dark and so forth. So we've got our work cut out for us. This isn't just about environment. It's not just about climate. It's about how we begin to shift these systems for security. A couple last thoughts. One of the upshots of the Overland Project has been this issue, can we take this to scale? And so there's a conversation, a very detailed and exciting conversation. It starts up here with Flint, Michigan, Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, Oberlin, Cleveland, over here to Youngstown, Ohio. Can we take the same logic of full spectrum integrated system sustainability and apply that to that whole region? And that is the heart of the U.S. Rust Belt. And I said to people, I can think of 5 good reasons why this is a bad idea. Call it Flint, Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, and Youngstown. And then I can think of 5 reasons why it's simply got to happen, and the same list of cities comes up. And so we pulled together foundations and universities and some other nonprofit organizations and mayors and so forth around the idea of taking this idea of integrated sustainability and applying it throughout the whole region. If you want to know more about that, I can answer that in questions. So let me close with final thoughts. We are now committed to a greenhouse world. New York Times and The Economist magazine referred to it as the Anthropocene, a term that had been used by Paul Crutzen and others years ago. It's a world we now make as humans. We're now the driver on a planet. We're larger than geologic forces in terms of the effect on the overall planet. But if we move quickly, and we move with a sense of urgency, there's still a good world that can be saved. All of you know that. But there's not a moment to spare. Donella Meadows, who I referred to in her article on leverage points, was asked if there was time to save humankind on the planet. And her answer was always yes, but just enough time, not a moment to lose. I'd say the same thing in 2013. We don't have any time. Time's not our friend in this case. But there's a world to be made that is rather different, and all of us know about it. It's in our bones. And what you're doing here at Parsons and in New York City with Plan YC and the Bloomberg Initiative, I mean, most of the exciting urban stuff has now started here in New York City. And the future, our future is going to be urban. That doesn't mean we ignore rural areas, but there's still a good world to be built. And all of you, and I applaud the work that all of you are doing to move toward that world. And then people say, well, we don't understand sustainability. Two last thoughts. Robert Fulghum wrote a little book once called, 20 years ago or so, called All I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And his message is very simple. I think it applies to sustainability. The rules of sustainability or resilience or human decency and dignity are not hard to grasp. You all learned them, like he refers to in this book, in kindergarten. You play fair. You play by the rules. You clean up your own messes. You don't leave carbon lingering in the atmosphere for future generations. You share your cookies in hard times. You don't take things that aren't yours, and you hold hands crossing the street. In dangerous times, we bond together. And the rules are really quite simple, but they are incredibly profound. That's a different kind of world. And then finally, one last thought. Before he died, Martin Luther King gave one of the best speeches of his life. And in that speech were these words: "There is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of man does not remain at the flood. It ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, 'Too late.' We can't let those words be written. We've got to move on this issue of climate change and design and fairness and dignity with a sense of wartime urgency. I thank you for all the work that you do here, what Parsons and the New School stand for. You are part of the most hopeful things I can think of. Thank you for your time and attention. Thanks.
So we're going to pass around the microphone for a Q&A. So just raise your hands and we'll have the microphone come down to you. First question? There's got to be a question. They're going to let you off easy.
It's dinner time.
Joel?
I'll start it off. David, take us a little bit up in scale and talk a little bit about what you see as the challenges in New York.
Oh, is there another question? Well, Joel, I'm a carpetbagger, and so whatever I say is worth exactly, nothing. For one thing, I think that the leadership here in the New York area, Mayor Bloomberg, has been really quite remarkable in this. And he came out long ago on the issue and portrayed it with the seriousness I think that should be portrayed. Let me step up from New York a little bit and say that nationally, the issues are we will see internal migration that will be rather striking, I think, in coming decades. People will be leaving areas where it's too hot and too dry. And so if you saw the article in the New York Times the other day about the people leaving Texas, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And they're going to be leaving as refugees, not seeking opportunity in Detroit and so forth. We had one of the meetings on the Lake Erie Crescent Project around the room, which included people from U.S. Department of Energy and foundations and cities and so forth. The issue that people will be coming back to the Great Lakes because there's water there, and for longer than in the south and southwest, there'll still be a temperate climate. So there's going to be internal migration. Here you're seeing that you've got to move back off the coast. And so this was a $40 million effort to buy property along the coast and so forth. We're going to see more of that. And yet at the very time we're on one side dismantling our government capacity to help us relocate, we're finding that we're going to need government to help us do a lot of things. To relocate, to create communities, to rebuild cities, and do all of these kinds of things. So I can't answer much about New York. I think there's a lot of things underway right now, but simply population distribution is going to change, I think, pretty dramatically. And this is on a little bit of a soapbox here, but I don't see this happening in a country where 400 of the wealthiest control more wealth than the bottom 150, or is it 185 million people. So our capacity to deal with issues at this scale, I think, are going to run into some real social questions. But every city is going to have an issue. And you got hit by Sandy, but then New Orleans got hit by, the Katrina, and Tuscaloosa got hit by massive, tornadoes. Every city is going to get hit. And what happens when 3 of these occur at the same time, or 5 of them occur at the same time? That's an issue. And so the short answer to your question is, I can't answer specifically here, but to say that this is going to require a massive increase in public capacity, I think that goes well beyond New York City. It goes to the nation and eventually to the whole world. But thanks for the question.
Hi, my name's Anjali. I'm here at the back. I'll wave so you can see me.
I can just see a bright light up there. So
I'm in the back, around the middle.
Oh, okay, there you are. All right.
I have a thought that I'd like your thoughts as well on, and then a question. The thought is around, because you talked a lot about design today, which certainly makes sense. And I'm wondering about more on the implementation side, because it seems like we already have a lot of the solutions that we need, and they're not being implemented for lack of political will or cronyism, money where it shouldn't be, et cetera. So you didn't talk much about that today, but it seems like the focus on design almost without the corresponding opportunity to implement on a larger scale. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that. And then the other piece, I mean, you had Bill McKibben up on the slide, and I'm curious about what you think about the divestment campaign, the campus divestment campaign, and what's happening at Oberlin.
Well, on the first, you're right smack in politics. And in a previous life, I was a small part of Jimmy Carter's transition team in 1976 on the energy issues. And we gave Jimmy Carter a document that was actually written before the election. He was up 6 or 8 points when we began to work on it, and he won fairly narrowly over a guy named Gerald Ford at the time. And that document involved Amory Lovins and Eugene Odom, the father of modern ecology, and Herman Daly, the great economist, and so forth. It's called the Wolf Creek Statement. And if I pull that out now, it still reads well. That was 1976. We called for a severance tax on energy at the port of entry, the mine mouth or the wellhead, and then let the effects of the tax ripple through the economy. And that document still reads well. Now, whether you're a cap and trade person or a tax person, doesn't really matter. Al Gore in his new book comes out for doing kind of both at different scales. They do different sorts of things. Either could be successful if we want it to be. Either could be a failure if we don't pay attention to it. So you're right smack in the middle of politics. That was 1976. In 1965, the first warning was given to a U.S. president about climate change. 1965. And so we've known about this for a long time. And there's a real issue about how we handle these kind of big issues politically. This is not when Lord Stern referred to climate change as the largest market failure in history. that was right, but before it was a market failure, it was a political failure. We want politicians to help anticipate big issues for us. And you feel, a lot of people in the movement feel a little bit like Winston Churchill must have felt in the 30s. Churchill was saying to the British people, you know, pay attention to Central Europe. If you don't, there'll be hell to pay. And well, they didn't, and there was hell to pay. We call it World War II. And so now we have this massive global crisis coming at us in this denial industry. And so your question asked me to get into the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue is money in U.S. politics. Pure, plain, and simple. But when I talk to audiences like you and like us, most people don't understand the history. And it goes back, there was a Supreme Court justice who was, before that, a corporate attorney, and name was Lewis Powell, lived in Richmond. Google the Powell memo. That announced a counterattack, written in 1971. That was the counterattack that was launched against lefties. And that was a time when, there was the Vietnam War and so forth. There's a lot of history about that, the Vietnam War, and cities were burning and so forth. It was a turbulent time. But Powell wrote this memo wanting corporations to make this massive counterattack. Well, that led to the Heritage Foundation, the Hudson Institute, and the Hoover Institute, and Fox News and so forth. We got to know our history. And our history was we got run over. We got totally blindsided. So while the, quote, left was marching on the English department, as somebody put it, they were taking over congressional committees. And they were spending billions of dollars to put Rush Limbaugh out there on hate radio and so forth and so on. And now we've got a badly confused public. You take money out of U.S. politics, and we have a radically different situation. It's not going to be nirvana, because this is planet Earth, and we've got an amazing capacity to screw things up. But this is the heart of the issue. And of course, the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United and so forth, just compounds the error, just gives it, lock, stock, and barrel to corporate interests. And the idea that corporations are legal persons. You and I are persons. We die. We have limited assets. You can only be in one place at one time. Corporations can be eternal. They have a global presence and so forth. And to say that they are legal persons, but that goes back to Supreme Court decision in 1886, the Santa Clara County decision. But it's money. And we allowed money to corrupt us. And there's no new insight there. Everybody in the room knows this. But so did Tom Jefferson. Tom Jefferson in 1816 was warning about the power of moneyed interest and corporate interests. And Abraham Lincoln, in a private letter written in 1864, says basically the kind of ball game's up. They're going to take over everything. He said it better than that. But so there's nothing new here. It's the power of money to corrupt the public purposes. So on divestment, I'm with Bill McKibben on this. I think it's a more if you put money people together, people understand how investment works. It's a more complicated issue than simple divestment. And I'm pretty persuaded there are certain ways you can pull money out or pull investment out that compounds the problem rather than solves it. But when McKibben puts the numbers up there, the numbers are really striking. There's $20 trillion of fossil fuel below ground, fossil fuels that are on the books. If you burn more than, 585 gigatons or whatever the number is, you fry the planet. So you can get our choices. You can keep the party going a while longer, but you fry the planet. But you take $20 trillion off the books, you're going to have some economic turmoil. So the issue here is to take that $20 trillion off in some kind of smart way. So you're looking for examples of when has there been a change in the ledger books of any organization. And the way the British handled slavery gives one not real good example, but an example of they simply paid slave owners. They didn't pay the slaves; they paid the slave owners to end slavery in the British Empire. It's not a real pretty story, but that's how they did it. They didn't fight a civil war over it. But could you take $20 trillion off the books in a way that you amortize that, you pay it out over, let's say, 50 years? Well, what's the global economy? 50 trillion? Something in that range. So could you handle a $20 trillion hit? Well, yeah, you probably could. And it could be done rationally. But it would take everybody at the table come to an agreement. We're going to stop burning fossil fuels. You can't burn that. That becomes part of the global commons. And that gets into a more complicated issue because we've seen since the enclosure movement in Britain, you've seen the commons get kind of parceled out. You now buy bottled water. That's probably the water is part of the commons. And the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, the atmosphere ought to be part of the commons. Fossil fuel should be part of the commons, the common property of humankind. And so I'm all for making this change. One final note on this. There is going to be a sea change. It's going to affect all of you in the way you design buildings, but you know this. When Spindletop blew off in Texas, and what was it, 1903 or whenever thereabouts, the energy return on investment was you could put in 1 unit of energy and you could get out 100 units of profitable energy to sell, 1 to 100. The energy return on investment now is probably more like you put in 1, you might get out 12 to 14. And it's going to continue to fall. And you think of the fossil fuel energy boom. Right now we're in this fracking frenzy in Ohio and Pennsylvania and so forth, and upstate New York. Actually all over the country almost. But it's deeper down, it's farther out, and if you include all the externalities in it, it is no bargain. There is no way you can take fracking and pump all that toxics down there and all the problems and have methane leaking at the wellhead. My hunch is we're going to find out it probably is a dead heat between fracked gas and coal. Don't quote that. That's just my impression of where it's likely to come out. But the point here is that we're now out of the era of cheap energy. And this is one of these ratio shifts where in the past labor was expensive, energy was cheap. And now we flip the ratio. Energy is expensive, labor is cheap. And we have a structural unemployment problem around the world. And it isn't just an artifact of energy return on investment, it's also a fact of robotics and automation and so forth. We're now moving people into the permanently unemployed, the structurally unemployed category. But when you design and you build, it's interesting to see where the design-build world intersects this social reality. And you wonder, if Hannah Arendt or Hans Morgenthau and some of the other people who came here to the New School confronted this issue, what they would say about it. That's an interesting issue. And my hunch is they would say some things that are very enlightening, but we have to infer from their writings how they would handle this. But they would handle it with putting the compass on the table. The magnetic north is justice and human dignity. And how do you preserve justice and human dignity? But now it's a more complicated issue because you now have to stretch it across generations. I've got 4 grandkids, and they have no voice in any of these kind of issues unless it's mine. And if you have children, or you plan to have children, or you have grandchildren perhaps, the same is true with you. And so divestment, absolutely. But let's go about it in the smartest possible way. And if you get, we have 14 or 15 million college students in the country. If the voice of 1/10 of those is loud enough, we'll get movement. And if you think about your role in education here, or ours in Oberlin, or wherever else, if we can't debate these issues on our campuses, in our classrooms, in our administration buildings, and even trustee meetings, where do they get debated? They won't be debated on corporate boardrooms, not likely. It's turned out to be, because of money, impossible to debate these things in any kind of rational way in the floor of Congress. It has to be here. So we in education have a vested interest in this. And then we also have the interest because we purport to induct all of you young people into responsible adulthood. It's kind of incumbent on us to act responsibly relative to the world you're moving into. So anyway, thanks for that question. I'm all for it. And I'm all hissied up now because I didn't. You got me all worked up. Yeah.
Hi. Building a little bit on what you were just saying, some of these sustainability issues are really complex, require a long-term view, can be overwhelming, and you're talking about expanding some of this vision from Oberlin outwards to the city and then to other cities. Are there ways of communicating to this now very diverse audience of people that you're trying to influence that you found to be more effective, or certain lines of argument that are more persuasive?
Well, it's a great question. The assumptions I have as an educator are that we do better with tangible things. And we're at our worst when we're talking about abstractions. And so this gets into the bailiwick of all of you as designers. Tangible things have this incredible pedagogical value. I don't much like the word pedagogy. It sounds, I've said around the country, it sounds like a foot disease, Do you have a pedagogy? Yeah, but I'm taking something for it. But what you design is tangible in a way that is powerful. Other than television, the most powerful educational force in American society is a shopping mall. And the message of a shopping mall is there. So the way I think these things ought to be approached is as a design challenge. And that's the beauty of what you have here, your heritage here and your capabilities and the work that you do. You can marry the work of these incredible social theorists with incredible designers. And that is, I think, the most powerful combination one can ever make. That means that the DNA of a design project is you're asking questions about the justice upstream, the justice downstream, how it fits in a larger fabric called society. That is incredibly powerful. And I don't know any other place that does that or has the capability that you all have here to do that. On how you approach these things, we are so polarized right now as a country. I watch Rachel Maddow at night, and I every now and then listen. My politics are obviously on my sleeve, but Rachel Maddow and people like that, that's where I find it, and Jon Stewart, that's where I find out how the world really works. But I listen to Rush Limbaugh, and what strikes me is there is a lot of anger loose in the country. And the question is, how do we harness that anger and that angst and that fear? And I think it is fear. How do we move that in a different direction? And it's not right or left. And the climate change stuff isn't right or left. It's going to hit Republicans and Democrats and independents equally. And so there's getting beyond the politics of this, I think, is important. And I think you do that with tangible kind of things. One conversation I had with the school I had on the screen up here, the public school in Oberlin is going to be built. They want to use a template kind of like we did with the Lewis Center. So it'd be a platinum school, and the place would become kind of its own pedagogy. And in a conversation with some people who were right-wingers, I mean, they were to the right of Louis XIV on most issues. It was interesting because if I talked politics with them, we were going nowhere. I couldn't talk climate change, but I could talk an incredible school where their kids and grandchildren were going to go. And that got through to them. And it strikes me that if the goal is immediate here, and we've got an issue to deal with, an infrastructure issue, a building issue or something, that you kind of transcend politics. If the goal is out here, if I say, what kind of community do you want here in Oberlin? Do you want the air clean? Do you want a prosperous economy? Do you want powered by sunshine and so forth? I get agreement at both those scales. Where I don't get agreement is right here in the middle, where ideology and abstractions rule. Now, I don't know if that makes sense everywhere or any particular place all the time, but it seems to make sense to me that if we get focused on practical kind of problem solving, that goes a long way to getting past some of this ideology. But it's kind of broken out in this country like a fever, and I think it's, and yet, having said that, let me back up one last thought about this. Public opinion polls are moving. Tony Lacerowitz up here at Yale has been tracking poll data on this issue for a long time, and he's showing real movement. I think the public is getting it. And you get hammered by disasters, and pretty soon you get enough tornadoes in Alabama, and you're going to have Alabamans on your side. And then the question, what do we do about it? And that is, and your point is that these are complicated and complex issues. And they haven't been treated yet with the seriousness I think that they really deserve. I'm blanking on the title of the guy who wrote a book I recommend to everybody here in the room. It's a big, thick book on philosophy, but it's called The Perfect Moral Storm. And it's a political philosopher at the University of Washington, Seattle. I forgot his name. I'll think of it in just a minute. But he takes 400 and some pages to talk about the issues and how they play themselves out over generations. And it is complicated, and we'd be mistaken if we make a big mistake if we treat them as if just they're simple pollution issues or whatever. They're not. They're anything but, and especially since we've already incurred that 1,000 years or longer of deteriorating climate in some ways. It's going to require a lot of thought. But thanks for that point.
One last question.
I'm a graduate of Oberlin College.
Oh, are you? Oh, yeah. They're everywhere. You can't get away from them anymore.
Absolutely. And I've seen the albino squirrel dancing on the screens, and I read Hannah Arendt in the Edmonia Lewis Center. So I hope you'll forgive that my question maybe belongs more in a town hall than a university. But I'm a little worried about my friends living below the poverty line in Oberlin who can't afford to buy groceries at the IGA anymore, because I think that there's another aspect of this economic stimulation. Another graduate of Oberlin has a film showing at Film Forum this week, a 1972 graduate, about the gentrification of Williamsburg. And there are some condominiums there that are LEED certified buildings. And so I guess my question is, in Oberlin and more generally, what do you see as a relationship between gentrification and sustainability?
That's a good question, thanks. And what class were you?
2011.
Oh, you're just recent. Oh, you're just a pup coming out. You know, Oberlin has an interesting history, the social history, and I've been there 23 years. And I'll be critical about the college because I think it's a more general kind of problem. We're really good on social issues, and we've taken stands on those issues. You saw in the newspaper dust up this past week about some racial incidents on campus and so forth. There were 2 stories in the Times, and we were on CNN and so forth. A good bit of that was really unfair because the president of the college, who was a former chief counsel for the University of Michigan, has been out in the forefront for years on diversity, and he was a guy that argued the cases for diversity at the Supreme Court. But that aside for the moment, the issue for the college has always led on social issues, but it's had difficulty, and I'm being bluntly honest with this, it's always had difficulty in turning the coin over to understand the connection between biophysical reality and social issues. And you can't separate that. If I paraphrase Thoreau, you know, what good is a good cause if you don't have a decent planet to put it on? And there is no issue that will not get dramatically worse or be lost entirely as climate change goes much further, period. So we will get, if we let climate change get much further out of order, and it isn't global warming, it's planetary destabilization. We've got to understand that's the ultimate justice issue. Now, what do we do about it? This is for us in Oberlin. One of the big driver in the Overland Project is basic equity and fairness. We're putting a lot of effort into building jobs and creating employment in the city and doing everything we can to attract businesses, start businesses, and then to move the economy into one where there's a lot of local ownership. And so our models are the Mondragon Cooperative in Spain, the Cleveland Foundation's Evergreen Project in downtown Cleveland. The question is, how do we begin to spread ownership and develop capacity? But do it in a way that's around solar systems and sustainably grown food and shelter and water purification, all those things that we're going to need that may very well be in short supply. So thanks for your question. It's good to meet an OB. You meet OBs everywhere, and one of the things I'm really proud of is where they show up. They're at the forefront, and this sounds like an advertisement, doesn't it? This is like the new school. They show up in the right causes at the right place and doing the right things. And so I'm really proud of what the school stands for. But the challenge for us, I think, in all of us, from new school as well, is to understand how social issues and biophysical reality connect. They're not different things. They appear to be different causes. They're just flip sides of the same coin. And there is no social cause that works without paying attention to biophysical reality, and vice versa. We've got to understand that that's kind of the ultimate issue of justice and so forth. So the sermon's over. Hey, thank you all for being such a good audience. Thanks.